All right, so we've been talking about how Jesus showed himself to the disciples 2 times already, actually. The first time that he showed himself, uh, Thomas wasn't there, and so Jesus showed himself again to the disciples, and at that time Thomas was there. And so when Thomas finally realized that Jesus truly is alive after he was killed on the cross and after he was buried, now he realizes Jesus truly is alive. And so he declared, "My Lord and my God." That is what Thomas said when he came face to face with Jesus, touching his fingers with the imprint of the nail and touching his side where he was struck with a spear. And so, in chapter 21 of the book of John, we read again another appearance of Jesus to the disciples. Jesus showed himself to the disciples while they were fishing. In John chapter 21, we read, like we said last time, that even though Jesus has been showing himself to the disciples, they still really have no clue as to what is coming next. Later on, we find in the writing of Luke in the book of Acts that they were wondering if Jesus is now going to restore the kingdom of heaven. But at this point, they have not had the chance to ask Jesus about these things because Jesus would show himself and then he would disappear. All right? But they are encouraged by this. But they still do not know exactly what's going to happen next. And so, in John chapter 21, we read that Peter told the other disciples, "You know what? I'm going to go fishing. I'm going to go fishing." It's like, I need to get back to work now. Because they were with Jesus for 3 years, right? They followed Jesus anywhere he went. They saw how Jesus multiplied the fish and multiplied the bread. They saw how Jesus healed the sick. They saw all kinds of things that Jesus did. And that's why they confirmed in their hearts he must be the Messiah, and then the crucifixion happened. And so now Jesus had resurrected from the dead, but still, no word from Jesus as to what's next. And so Peter said, "I'm going back fishing." Going back fishing. Sometimes when we can't decide on what to do next, we just said, "Well, I'm going to go back to what I know best to do." And for Peter, it was fishing. And so he told the other disciples and said, "I'm going back fishing," and they went with him. But they fished all night, didn't catch anything. Didn't catch anything. And so in chapter 21, Jesus was standing right there on, far away from them because they were still out in the water. But they saw Jesus, but they didn't recognize Jesus. And he said to them, "Hey," "why don't you cast the net over to the other side?" And so they did, without realizing that it was Jesus who was talking to them. And so when they finally realized that it was Jesus, because Jesus cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat and you will find a catch. So they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Therefore, the disciples whom Jesus loved, that would be John, said to Peter, "Hey, it is the Lord." See, at that point, they did not know it was Jesus who was telling them to cast the net over to the right-hand side. And so when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea and swam all the way to the beach, because it was Jesus again showing himself there. And then Jesus actually had breakfast ready for them. And Jesus said to them, "Hey, come and have breakfast." And they ate breakfast prepared by Jesus. Wow, that would have been nice, right? Jesus fixing breakfast for you. That's what Jesus did for the disciples. So, after breakfast, this is where we're going to get our message today. Okay? After breakfast, Jesus spoke to Peter. Jesus spoke to Peter. And this is how the conversation went, from verses 15 all the way to 19. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." So Jesus said to him, "Tend my lambs." He said to him again a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." So Jesus said to him, "Shepherd my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." But Jesus said to him then, "Tend my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go." Now, this he said, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, "Follow me." So there are three things that I would like for us to see from this passage. First, Jesus knows the condition of our heart. Do you think he was asking Peter if he loved him because he didn't know whether Peter knew or whether Jesus knew if Peter loved him or not? Of course, that's not really the point, because we know, as Peter said, "Jesus, you know all things." You know all things. Why? Because Jesus is God. You know, we say that over and over. Jesus is omniscient. Jesus is all-knowing. Nothing is hidden from him. Even the things that you do not even know yet, because you have not made a decision on yet, he already knows. He already knows. The decisions you will make tomorrow, the food you will eat tomorrow and next week and next month, he already knows all those things. But he wanted to ask Peter, "Peter, do you love me more than these?" Now, different commentators have different comments regarding that. They said, was Jesus saying to Peter, "Peter, do you love me more than these fish that you just caught?" Right? Because for a fisherman, a fish is worth a lot, right? That's his living. Right? That's his living. But nothing in the scripture says that Jesus was pointing to the fish. Okay? So, who do you think Jesus was pointing to? We don't really know. But could it be that he was telling Peter, "Peter, do you love me more than these?" Meaning the other disciples? Is your love for me greater than the love of John or James or the other disciples or Thomas? Was that the question that he was asking? We don't know. So what can we say? Well, they could be both, right? Maybe he said, "These pointing to the apostles, the other apostles, and pointing to the fish that they just caught, and probably including the boat. Because for a fisherman, like I said, it could be a boat. A boat would be very, very important to a fisherman like Peter was, right? And the fish would be important. And the disciples who were his friends that went fishing with him are also important. Especially if you have a big catch, you need another person to help you haul the net back in, right? So they all could be important. And Jesus said, Peter, do you love me more than these? Maybe including the disciples, the fish, the boat. Why is this important? Because in Matthew chapter 26, after Jesus told the disciples that he would be handed over to the Sanhedrin, that he would be killed and persecuted. In Matthew 26, verse 33, Peter replied to Jesus saying, even if they all, meaning the other disciples, he said, even if they all fall away, I will not. And then Jesus said to Peter, Peter, you know what? Before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me. Well, Peter again answered. Do you know that? Peter said to Jesus, oh no, even if I have to die with you, I will not fall away. Well, we all know the story, right? Peter denied Jesus 3 times. So now, Jesus is asking Peter, do you love me more than these? Probably even including his life. Because he said to Jesus, before he denied him 3 times, if all fall away, I will not. Even if I have to die, I will not fall away. And so now Peter is confronted by everything that's important to him. And Jesus asking him, do you love me more than these? Whatever these referred to. And of course, Peter knew he cannot lie to Jesus, right? But at the same time, it is good to know that in the heart and hearts of Peter, he truly did love Jesus. Could it be possible also that even while Peter was denying Jesus, it was not because he stopped loving Jesus? Is that possible? It is, isn't it? I was talking to someone who, after committing her life to Christ as a young woman, probably I think at the age of 13 or 14, she said she got involved in a lot of bad things in life. Drugs, alcohol, promiscuity. And she said the sad thing is that even at that time when I was doing all those things, I never stopped believing in Jesus. And in times when I was really, really, really in a bad place, all I can do really is call on Jesus. And he always helped me out. And so I said, well, see, that's the thing. That's why our salvation is not based on works. And it's based on whether we truly believe in Jesus or not. And only Jesus knows the heart. Because the truth is, even while we are doing things that are not in accordance to the will of God, actually, even in those times, our faith in Jesus Christ never stopped. Well, for some, I know for myself. And that is good. Just like Peter. And so he knew He cannot lie to Jesus, and so he just said, he did not compare himself to the others. All he can tell Jesus was, Jesus, you know that I love you. And that would mean, yes, even when I was denying you, it's not because I stopped loving you. I still loved you then. I just got too scared. And that has happened to us, all of us. Thank God, His love for us also never stops. It's just that He wants us to confirm for ourselves, not for Him, because He sees the heart, but for ourselves, our love for Him. And He wants us to express our love to Him. Again, not for His benefit, but again for our benefit. To continue to confirm in our hearts that we do love Him. And so, Jesus, knowing that we love Him, commands us. And what is the command for those who love Jesus, like Peter? Because, this was written not just for Peter, or just to tell us about Peter, but this is written for us. That we have to take this also as a command to us. And what is that command? To tend His lambs, the little ones, the ones that are vulnerable, the ones that are weaker than us, that we are to care for the ones who are weak, like the lambs. That we are to shepherd His sheep. That means to think of how we can serve the others who are His sheep. And that is actually what we do as brothers and sisters in Christ. When we first came to know Jesus Christ, we started going to worship services and Bible studies and everything because we're thinking of ourselves, I want to grow more. I want to know more. I want to grow in my walk with God, and there's nothing wrong with that. Actually, we need to continue to have that desire. But later on, it actually should be that, how can I minister to others? Like, for example, if I do come to church, is it more about me or is it more about worshiping God and encouraging the others who are there? But the truth is, we get all of the above, right? We get encouraged, we get to encourage others, and then we are drawn closer to God. But it becomes more of what we can do for others more than for ourselves. Because if we do not grow out of just, what can I get? Something's wrong. Something is wrong. Because if we love God, we are commanded by God Himself in the person of Jesus Christ to focus on others, tending His lambs, shepherding His sheep, and tending His sheep. Looking out for the welfare of others and not himself. And then after Jesus told Peter these things, then He said to Peter, "Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go." And John, the beloved apostle, said, Jesus said this to Peter to signify to Peter, and I guess for the rest of the apostles, by what kind of death he would glorify God. That it wasn't going to be a natural death, that he would die because of sickness in bed, but that he would die a death that is forced upon him, signifying a kind of death. It seemed to indicate a violent kind of death. And based on tradition and traditional histories by mouth that was passed on, one of what was said about Peter was that he was crucified. That, in a way, coincides with what Jesus said. You will stretch out your hands. And based on tradition and history, the Christian history and Christian historians, it was noted that Peter died of crucifixion himself. A violent kind of death. But it's not just a violent kind of death. The important part about this death is that a death that glorified God. That's what John says. Signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. So for us, the question is, when we die, will it be a death that glorifies God? Will God be glorified even in our death? Is the question for us. I remember going to a funeral of someone that we knew for a long time. And when we went to the funeral, the relatives were there and just grieving and crying. And one of the things mentioned was, it is a senseless kind of death. And I said, why did you say that? And the relative said, oh, did you not hear what killed her? I said, no. And the relative said, she overdosed. And she's saying she should not be dead now, but she never got away from the evil of drug addiction. And it just burdened me so much to hear those words. Senseless kind of death. And when we got home, I told my wife, I hope that would never be said of my death. In the case of Peter, we are told that God, in the person of Jesus Christ, specifically said and signified the kind of death that Peter would glorify God with. And then after he said that to Peter, he said to Peter, follow me. So in our lives, before our death, may we always follow Christ in this life. And when we do, when the end of life for us comes, it will be a death that glorifies God.